Emotional sobriety. If I had the time, that's exactly what it would be. It would be silence. Emotional sobriety would be me being able to be in a room with all of you and not needing to talk and not needing any response back and not needing any validation from you or from anybody else. It's just to be comfortable in myself. And I think that's really what it's about. Emotional sobriety. If I go to the end of what I would normally say, it's like when I accept myself as I am, you as you are, and the world as it is today, then I can be emotionally sober. I'm just at peace. I'm I'm not agitated about what I have or what I haven't got or what's coming down the line. I'm able to be just here now. And yeah, it might get a bit dodgy if I didn't have a roof over my head and some food on the table. But if I've got a roof over my head and food on the table and I've got a higher power, then I believe I'm condemned to be happy, joyous, and free. And the only challenge is how do I actually get to that? How do I get to the stage where I'm actually content? Because I mean, I was always discontent. Now, I was discontent in a very happy fashion. So I was discontent with the way I was being treated, and people were telling me, why couldn't I be different, et cetera, et cetera, all this sort of stuff. But so what I just did was I found various substances and people and other things, and I used those, and I basically, what other people thought of me was none of my business, and I didn't give a damn. And I really, but the more they thought that I was out there, the better, you know. And that went along and it went very well for quite a while until it didn't. And then it just started, it seemed like I was just hitting up against walls. Eventually, no matter about what, um, I came into a 12-step program AA originally, and I came in, just put the top on the bottle, thought the alcohol was the problem, didn't realize that it was something very different. And I stayed around for about 3.5 years, and then I went back out for another 5 years. And when I came in the next time, I was really, really in a bad way. And I was going to 3 meetings a day just to get through the day. And it was just it was hellish. It really was. And the detoxification. And then, once I got through the detoxification, suddenly, getting to that stage of thinking, well, why is everything still, why am I still restless, irritable, and discontent? And why am I having all these problems, etc. Over the years, um, that was, in on New Year's Eve, that'll be like 26 years ago, since I last had a drink. And it's been really great in many ways, but it's been it's been really complicated as well because I've worked steps and I've worked, and I've taken people through the steps and I've run workshops for people and I'm in about 5 different fellowships and I've done the steps in various different fellowships. I've done a lot of amends and I've done a lot of this sort of stuff and whatever. But I still found it sort of about 14 years sober in AA. I was in Australia and I was in another fellowship and I was talking to somebody and he said, that sounds like restless, irritable, and discontent, Brendan. That doesn't sound very sober. And I was like, but here I am and I'm taking people through the program and whatever. But what it was that I had yeah, I had to go through, I had to go back and go through the steps again. And there was a discomfort when I came up against a roadblock in my recovery. And it was, I'd been, I got to a stage where I was listening to a lot of speaker tapes, and I came across a tape by a fellow called Tom Brady, which many of you probably know as Tom Brady Jr. Um, and it was about emotional sobriety. And he was talking about how when he was 26 years sober, he was entering, he just wanted to die. He'd had enough. He'd done all the program, he'd done the steps, the whole sort of thing. But his wife of 11 years had left him. She died a year later. He had various different illnesses and he just wanted to die. And he was just praying to God, like not to wake up the following day. And he came across Bill W.'s letter that he wrote in 1953. which is Emotional Sobriety, the Next Frontier. And I had received a copy of that in Spanish from somebody years before, and I knew there was something important in it, but I couldn't see what exactly it was. But he did talk about that anytime you're in discomfort, whether it's large or small, there's some unhealthy dependency and a related demand. And I couldn't quite see what that was, but listening to Tom Brady, he was talking about how he had a lot of self-hatred. And he saw self-hatred as it was like Narcissus frowning at himself in the pool. And I didn't have a lot of self-hatred, I mean, that was not one of the things that sort of jumped up at me. I was pissed off with a lot of people. And I thought if people would just like sort of allow me to be who I am, and if they would just stop criticizing me, Lord save us, if they just stop criticizing me. Now, the problem with criticism for me is if you have a different opinion from me on a subject, that's criticism. So it kind of makes it difficult for people to deal with me because you got to really walk on eggshells. But I thought it was me who was walking on the eggshells. And I just needed you to sort of realize that obviously I was right. And so, if you just realize that, then you wouldn't be giving me a different opinion and we wouldn't be having to go through this discomfort, huh? But I got to listening to Tom Brady and I realized that my dependence was on women. I had a dependence on whatever woman was in my life. And she may have come into my life like 10 minutes before or 5 years before. It didn't really matter. It's just this moment in time, I had a dependence on a woman. And if she was happy with me, everything was grand. It's like that fellow who comes up out of the basement of his house and the house has been blown away by the torment. And he says, look, the wind has stopped blowing. That was me. I mean, my house could have been burning down, but if somebody is over here saying they're happy with me, then I can just block out everything else. Yeah. I won't go back into where all it came from or whatever, but just is the way it is. Yeah. And I had a situation where I have my son and his mother, and we had become estranged. And I thought that if I worked the 12 steps and I worked really, really well, she'll come back, everything will be hunky dory, and then we'll be happy out. So I started working the steps to get that back. And I did it, I mean, I did it to an obsessive level. I mean, I wrote 3 books, and I remember the guy who came in to do the fifth step with me. He says, Brendan, I'm only here for 3 days and I'm supposed to be working, I'm like, what are we going to do with all of this? We just can't go through all of this sort of stuff. But I thought like if I get this and I get the 5th and 6th step done and all of that sort of stuff, and God takes away all my defects of characters, my image was of somebody who's going out. I mean, I don't know if you know that image of going looking for clams on the beach. You see these guys out there and they got a shovel and pick it up, get the clam in, and you got to get it up quick before it burrows down into the sand, and you put it in a bucket. And then you've got these little piles of sand, but then the sea is going to come in, it's going to wash it all smooth. And when the sea goes back out again, you got a flat sand, and that was kind of my image of what it was going to be when all my defects were gone, and just be like, I'll be just back like the smooth sand. Yeah. And that was like 20 years ago, and the sand is not smooth. And there's plenty of clams still around there. But I started working on this process of I'm going to work all these steps and I'm going to go through this and then I'm going to make amends, and I was trying to make amends. I was doing amends. And eventually, I remember saying to a sponsor I had at the time, I said, like, he said to me, he says, Brendan, you should really stay committed to that relationship. And I said, what relationship? There is no relationship here. I ring her up and it's always painful. And he said to me, she's doing her job perfectly. And I thought, this guy really is nuts. And he said, she's going to teach you unconditional love. And I thought, that sounds really painful. I'm all for like sort of, gift giving and being considerate and all this, that to an extent, but I
You have 10
realized that,
minutes left. Thank you.
thanks. Sorry, that's how many, Claire?
You've got 10 minutes left.
Oh, lovely. Great, great, great. And so it was all about, I didn't realize it, but it was all about like sort of getting the exterior comfortable around me so I could just be okay with me. I didn't want to be disturbed. I wanted to be able to basically do whatever I wanted to do or do nothing. But I needed the people around me to be happy and content, but not too demanding. So, you know, and I needed them to sort of be smiling. So if I come into the house, I expect my partner to be smiling because here I am. Now, if they're not smiling, I presume it's something that I've done wrong. Now we have to get to the bottom of this because we have to find out what it is. Because if it's that thing that I did years ago, we've been through that before. We just have to get through to what it is, get down to the kernel of it, get it fixed, get it things, get them back smiling so I can now sit down and watch the football in peace. And just, it's all about like sort of getting to that stage where I can be comfortable with me. And, but basically what it meant was that I've put myself in hock to how other people feel. So I was listening to this guy, Tom B, and nothing was going to work out. I mean, I couldn't get any change going here. And I had to get down on my knees. I got down on my knees and I prayed to God to take away my need for the mother of my son or any woman to give me my sense of self. And then I remember I walked up by the river. I was down staying where my parents were in Galway, and I walked up by the river and I found a quiet place and I got down on my knees again and I prayed again for this. And as I was coming back from there, and I remember exactly where I was, actually where my foot was going down in this small, like sort of, it was kind of boggy land, and I just trying to, on a small bit of wood to step over this small stream. And I just thought, it hit me. The 11-step prayer, which some call the St. Francis prayer, the Bill W. said in his letter, Bill said that he knew that the answer to this issue, the emotional sobriety, was in the 11-step prayer. Now, just Bill, remember, he's the founder of the AA program, and at 20 years sober, he's going into depression again. And he's wondering, why am I going into depression? And he really didn't want to, because he suffered very badly from depression. And he actually wrote the 12 and 12, the 12 steps and 12 traditions during 3 years of continuous depression. So he went to his friend, Father Ed Dowling, who was a Jesuit priest who was not in AA, but he was a great friend of AA's. And he said, Father Ed, he said, like, what's wrong? And Ed told him, he says, Bill, you're too dependent on AA to give you your sense of self. And that was it. Bill realized, and he said he found that he had his almost absolute dependence on people and the circumstances in his life to give him sense of self. And so Bill, he went to work on this, and he looked at it, and eventually came to understand that the solution he saw was in the 11-step prayer. And it was in that part, God grant that I might seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, and to love than to be loved. And, but he couldn't see how to get to it, couldn't see how to make it work. So anyway, I was there, and I suddenly realized that prayer, which sounds like a prayer to, to be a saint, God, make me a channel of thy peace. Where there's hatred, let me bring love. Where there's wrong, let me bring forgiveness, and all of that it's not a prayer to be a saint. It's a prayer for freedom. If my goal is, God grant that I might seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, and to understand than to be understood, and to love than to be loved, then I'm not judging my life on what I'm receiving. I'm actually enjoying my life on what I'm giving. And and Bill says that he realized that he wasn't able to get God's complete love and all that was there on offer until he was able to offer love in an appropriate fashion in all his relationships.
5 minutes left. 5
thanks,
minutes.
thanks very much, Claire. I started working on this. I started reading a lot about it and listening to a lot of speaker tapes. And I came across, various ones, which I'll just mention because, they small things that people say can have a big impact on me. One of them was Dr. Bob's son, Robert, and Dr. Bob was the other founder of AA. His son ended up marrying an alcoholic woman, and he ended up in Al-Anon. And he had a speaker tape that I listened to, and he said something which I found very touching. He said, if any two people are exactly the same, one of them is unnecessary. And I really loved that because it sort of said that all of us are necessary as we are, not as somebody else might think we could be or should be or anything, but as we are. Yeah. And in amongst the recordings I came across a rabbi Shai's, and he tells, a lot of, I thought originally very bad jokes, but as I listened to him and I listened more and more, I heard behind the words, and there was a couple of things that really hit me. He talks about this Rebbe. I think that's one of the highest the highest level sort of in the Jewish faith. And this Rebbe is dying and he's crying, and the people around him are saying, but Rebbe, why are you crying? And he said, I'm crying because I'm afraid of judgment. And they said, but sure, how could you be afraid of judgment? You're like a saint. And he said, yeah, you don't understand. You think that I'm afraid that when I get to the pearly gates, they're going to say, Zachariah, why weren't you more like Moses? And he said, no, I'm afraid that when I get there, they're going to say, Zachariah, why weren't you more like Zachariah? And that really, to me is, I'm not here to be Martin Dubb or Raf or Aaron or anybody else. I'm here to be Brendan T. Speaks too much. God still hasn't taken that away. Is totally ADHD, forgets every damn thing, is always late, and now makes no bones about it at all, and will tell you that he's going to be late. And will tell you that, like, sort of, do not expect me, like, really, to be at the meetings. And if, often you'll hear speakers say, my sponsor told me to be 10 minutes early and this, that, and the other. And I said, well, good for you, because it is not possible for me. I lived on the 4th floor, worked on the 2nd floor. I could get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, but I will not be there before 9:05. It is not possible, and I don't know why it's not possible, but I don't have to fight it anymore. I don't have to fight it anymore. This way of life and this sort of thing has really given me the peace to be who I am. And one of the other things that was there, and I started off with it, was there was this rabbi was sort of saying, he said, that the only way I'm going to get to self-validation, as opposed to looking for this external validation, is through God consciousness. And I thought, oh, well, here we are. I mean, I got a whole thing going with my higher power, but, we back to this whole thing, the third step and God, and try to find God. And I said, like, is this a kind of a Thomas Merton thing, 18 years, in a silent monastery trying to find God? And he said something which really, really changed my life. And it was what I started off with. He said, when you accept yourself as you are, others as they are, and the world as it is today, that's God consciousness. And I thought, I can do that. I don't have to like it all, but all I'm being asked to do is to accept the reality that's in front of me at this moment in time. And one of the most important parts of that is to accept that allowing people to be the way they are, means I can accept that the way that they're treating me is not personal to me. That's just who they are. You take me out of the equation, you put somebody else in front of them, and they'll be treating them the same way. And, I haven't got it down and dusted by any means, but I live like this, and I think I'll finish on this. A sponsee of mine was visiting me when I moved back to Ireland some years ago, and I was doing up this old house, and, there was no floor in the kitchen. There's no floor in the bathroom for a while. And that sounds like I'm finishing. That's nice. Yeah. And anyway, so it's no floor in the kitchen. And the sink was actually hanging from ropes from the rafters above, and I had to climb a step ladder to wash the dishes. It was a little bit chaotic. And so I was out the back one day, and this friend of mine, he was walking through the garden and he was on the phone to somebody, and he said, I'm down here watching Brendan walk happily through the chaos of his life. And I thought, that's exactly it. You know, I cannot control it. I cannot control me, and I don't know what's coming. But I've got a higher power watching out for my back, and I got a roof over my head, and I got food on the table, and it's a good day today. And thanks for letting me share.